The kitchen window framed the October morning like a painting I'd grown tired of looking at. Frost kissed the pumpkins scattered across my 40-acre farm, their orange bellies gleaming under a sun that still held summer's warmth. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, and wondered when this view had stopped bringing me peace. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. At 62, I should have been content. The mortgage was paid off, had been for 8 years now. The farmhouse needed work, sure, but it was mine. Every board, every stone, every memory carved into its walls belonged to me. I'd raised 2 boys here after their father died in that car accident 15 years ago. I'd planted every apple tree, mended every fence, and survived every winter that tried to break me. But contentment felt as elusive as the morning mist burning off the fields. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. Murray's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened with the familiar knot that came whenever my younger son called these days. "Morning, Mom." His voice carried that forced brightness I'd learned to distrust. "Murray," I kept my tone neutral, waiting. "Listen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week about the farm." There it was, the same conversation we'd been having for months, dressed up in different words, but always circling back to the same demand. I moved away from the window, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. I'd refinished myself 3 summers ago. "There's nothing to follow up on, honey. I told you." "Mom, just hear me out." The brightness cracked, revealing the impatience underneath. "Sadis and I have been working on the numbers, and this opportunity isn't going to wait forever. The tech startup scene is moving fast, and if we don't secure funding soon, then find another way." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them. We'd been down this road too many times. A pause. Then Sadis's voice in the background, muffled, but insistent. I caught fragments. "Stubborn, and doesn't understand." Murray cleared his throat. "Mom, you're too old to understand dreams like this. The world has changed. Sitting on all that land when it could be turned into something meaningful." Too old. The words hit like a physical blow. I sank onto the kitchen stool, gripping the phone tighter. Too old to understand dreams? I didn't mean, look, that came out wrong. But Mom, you're 62. What are you really doing with 40 acres? When was the last time you even planted more than that little vegetable garden? Each word was a small knife, precise and cutting. He wasn't wrong about the farming. I'd leased most of the land to neighboring farmers for the past 5 years. But he was wrong about everything else. This land isn't just an investment, Murray. It's what Dad would have wanted. I know you've said that 100 times, but Dad's been gone for 15 years, and you're living in the past. The line went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. 15 years. Had it really been that long since Dean's funeral, when I'd stood in the same kitchen, surrounded by casserole dishes and condolence cards, promising myself I'd hold on to everything he'd loved? "Sadis wants to talk to you," Murray said finally. "She thinks maybe she can explain the business plan better than I can. Woman to woman." I don't need anyone to explain anything to me. But even as I said it, I could feel my resolve wavering. Not because I was considering their proposal. I'd never sell the farm to fund their pipe dream. But because Murray's words had lodged themselves under my skin like splinters. Too old to understand dreams. Just think about it, okay? Sadis really excited about the possibility of you being involved. She says you could be like a silent partner. You know, part of our success story. Our success story. As if my 40 acres of sweat and memories were just another line item in their business plan. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen that had witnessed every important moment of my life for the past 25 years. The table where Murray had done his homework, where I'd taught him to tie his shoes, and where we'd sat across from each other planning his high school graduation party. The counter where I'd kneaded bread every Sunday, where I'd cried over bills I wasn't sure I could pay, where I celebrated the final mortgage payment with a glass of Dean's best whiskey. Too old. The irony didn't leave on me. Murray, who lived off my generosity through college and his 3 failed business ventures, Murray, who'd brought home Sadis 2 years ago like a trophy wife, and immediately started treating his childhood home like a resource to be mined. Sadis, with her perfectly straightened hair and MBA from a school I'd helped pay for, who looked at my farmhouse like it was a quaint museum piece and my land like it was wasted potential. I walked to the living room mantelpiece and picked up the framed photo of my boys from Murray's college graduation. 18-year-old Dustin stood tall and proud in his cap and gown, his arm around his younger brother, 22. Then Dustin had that serious expression he'd worn since childhood. My responsible one, my steady one, my adopted one, though we'd stopped using that word years ago. Dustin, who called every Sunday without fail. Dustin, who sent postcards from Europe where he'd been working for the past 2 years building his legal career and writing about how much he missed my apple pie. Dustin, who never once asked me for money or questioned my choices or suggested I was too anything. The contrast stung. I set the photo down and noticed my hands were shaking slightly. When had they started doing that? Another sign of age, another reminder that Murray might have a point about time slipping away. But time for what? To give up everything I'd worked for so he could chase another get-rich scheme? The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floors. I'd always loved this time of day, when the light turned everything soft and forgiving, but today it felt different, like a spotlight on everything I was losing, everything I'd already lost. My phone buzzed with a text message. Sadis. Hi, Deborah. Murray told me about your conversation. I'd love to chat with you about our vision for the startup. Maybe we could meet for coffee this week. I think once you understand the potential, you'll be as excited as we are. The heart emoji at the end felt like a mockery. Sadis had never sent me heart emojis before. In fact, Sadis had barely spoken to me beyond polite pleasantries at family dinners. But now that she wanted something, suddenly we were girlfriends. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to type back something cutting, something that would make clear exactly what I thought of their vision. But another part, the part that remembered Murray as a gap-toothed 6-year-old bringing me dandelions, wanted to try one more time to make him understand. Instead, I typed, "We can talk." The response came immediately. "Wonderful! How about Thursday at 2? There's a lovely cafe in town, Benson's Corner. I'll make a reservation. Can't wait." 2 heart emojis this time. The desperation was almost palpable. I set the phone aside and walked back to the kitchen window. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the fields. Somewhere in those shadows lay the ghost of the woman I used to be. The young mother who'd thought love and sacrifice were the same thing, who'd believed that giving everything to her children would somehow guarantee their respect and devotion. That woman had been wrong about a lot of things, but she'd been right about one thing. This land was worth fighting for, not because of its market value or development potential, but because it was mine, because I'd earned it through years of scraped knees and sleepless nights, through seasons of plenty and seasons of want, through the kind of daily choices that build a life brick by brick. Murray thought I was too old to understand dreams. What he didn't understand was that I was living mine, had been living it for 25 years, and I had no intention of letting anyone, not even my own son, take it away from me. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that used to make me feel alive. Now, as I stood before my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my dark green blazer, it felt more like armor than clothing. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, professional but not desperate, confident but not confrontational, the kind of look that said, I might be 62, but I wasn't anyone's fool. The drive to Benson's Corner took 15 minutes through countryside that had barely changed in 3 decades. Rolling hills dotted with farmhouses like mine, their owners mostly my age or older. All of us stubborn holdouts against the creeping development that had swallowed the eastern edge of the county. I wondered how many of them had children circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to cash in on their parents' life's work. Benson's Corner Cafe occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, all white gingerbread trim and hanging flower baskets. I'd been here exactly twice. Once for my neighbor Haley's retirement party, and once when the ladies from church had organized a book club that lasted exactly 3 meetings. It wasn't my kind of place. All overpriced lattes and motivational quotes painted on reclaimed barnwood. But it was Sadie's kind of place, which should have been my first warning. I spotted her immediately through the front window, perfectly positioned at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Her blonde hair was pulled back in what she probably called a power bun, and she was wearing the kind of cream-colored blazer that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked up and waved, her smile bright enough to power the cafe's Edison bulb fixtures. The hostess, a girl young enough to be my granddaughter, led me through the maze of mismatched furniture to Sadie's table. The scent of cinnamon and expensive coffee couldn't quite mask the underlying smell of fresh paint and forced charm. Deborah! Sadie stood and leaned in for an air kiss that barely grazed my cheek. You look wonderful! I love that blazer. It's so classic. Classic. The polite way of saying outdated. I'd bought this blazer for Dean's funeral 15 years ago, and it had served me well for every serious occasion since, but under Sadie's appraising gaze, it felt like a relic. Thank you for meeting me, I said, settling into the chair across from her. I have to admit, I'm curious about this conversation Murray said we needed to have. Sadie's smile flickered for just a moment. Well, I thought it might be nice to talk without the men around. You know, sometimes they can be so intense about business. Our server appeared, another impossibly young girl with purple-streaked hair and a nose ring. Sadie ordered something called a vanilla bean oat milk macchiato with lavender foam. I asked for black coffee and watched the girl's face fall slightly as if I'd personally disappointed her artistic coffee aspirations. So, Sadie said, leaning forward with her hands clasped, Murray told me about your concerns regarding the startup. I completely understand your hesitation. It's a big decision. Is it? I kept my voice level, because from where I sit, there's no decision to make. The farm isn't for sale. Another flicker in that perfect smile. Of course, and we respect that. But I thought maybe if you understood the full scope of our vision, you might see this differently. Not as selling the farm, but as transforming it into something bigger. The coffee arrived, along with Sadie's elaborate concoction, topped with what looked like purple foam art. She photographed it with her phone before taking a sip, and I found myself wondering if anything in her life happened without being documented for social media. Tell me about this vision, I said, though I already knew I wouldn't like what I heard. Sadie's eyes lit up. It's so exciting, Deborah. We're developing an app called Farm Fresh. It connects urban consumers directly with local food producers. Think of it as the Uber of sustainable agriculture. The Uber of sustainable agriculture. I sipped my coffee and tried not to let my expression give away my thoughts. The beauty of it, Sadie continued, is that we're not just building an app, we're creating a lifestyle brand. And your farm would be our flagship property, the face of authentic American farming. We'd build a state-of-the-art facility for food processing and distribution, maybe add a farm-to-table restaurant, possibly even a boutique hotel for agritourism on my 40 acres. Well, yes, we'd need to purchase the property to make the improvements, but you'd be a stakeholder in the company, a founding partner, really. Your name would be on everything. Deborah's Farm Fresh or something equally authentic. Authentic. There was that word again, weaponized by people who wouldn't know authentic if it bit them on their designer jeans. And what would happen to my house? I asked. Oh, we'd absolutely preserve the farmhouse. It has such character. We might need to make some updates, you know, open up some walls, add some contemporary touches, but the bones are gorgeous. It would make a perfect visitor center or maybe a charming cafe space. A visitor center. My kitchen, where I had fed my boys for 20 years, turned into a place for strangers to buy overpriced coffee and take selfies. Sadie, I said carefully, what you're describing isn't transforming my farm, it's erasing it. Her face fell into an expression of practiced concern. I understand why it might feel that way, but think about the legacy aspect. Instead of just leaving Murray and Dustin a piece of land, you'd be leaving them a thriving business, a real inheritance. Dustin. She'd mentioned Dustin, which surprised me. In the 2 years she'd been part of our family, Sadie had barely acknowledged my older son's existence, especially after she'd learned he was adopted. Has Dustin expressed interest in this venture? I asked. Well, he's been so busy with his legal work in Europe, but I'm sure once he understands the opportunity, she waved her hand vaguely, the important thing is that you'd be securing both boys' futures. Both boys. As if she gave a damn about Dustin's future. How much money are we talking about? I asked bluntly. Sadie nearly choked on her lavender foam. I'm sorry, you want me to sell my farm to fund your startup? How much are you asking for? She recovered quickly, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what looked like a detailed presentation. Well, we've had the property appraised at $1.2 million, which honestly seems conservative given the development potential, but we're only asking for $800,000 in startup funding. The rest would remain as your equity stake in the company. $800,000. The number hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. And if your app fails, I asked. It won't. The response was immediate and defensive. We have a solid business plan, proven market research, and several potential investors already interested. This isn't some fly-by-night operation, Deborah. This is the future of food distribution. I thought about Murray's previous business ventures. The organic dog treat company that folded after 6 months. The subscription box for artisanal beard oils that never made it past the concept stage. The food truck that had been repossessed before he'd made a single sale. Sadie, I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care, I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to me, but my answer is still no. Her composure cracked like ice in spring. Deborah, please just think about it for a few more days. Talk to your financial advisor. Maybe get a second opinion on the property value. I really think you're not seeing the full picture here. I see the picture just fine. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. And I see that you and Murray have already spent a lot of time planning what to do with my property without actually asking if I wanted to sell it. That's not... We would never... Sadie scrambled to her feet, her carefully constructed facade finally falling away. Deborah, Murray is your son. He deserves better than to watch his dreams die because you're too sentimental about an old house. There it was, the real Sadie, stripped of her heart emojis and fake friendship. The woman who thought my life's work was just sentiment, standing in the way of her ambitions. You're right, I said, quietly. Murray is my son, which is exactly why I know the difference between supporting his dreams and enabling his delusions. I left her standing there in the cafe, her purple foam going flat in the afternoon light. The drive home felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting behind the maple trees Dean had planted the year Dustin started kindergarten. Inside, the house felt different somehow. Smaller, more fragile. I walked through the rooms, seeing them through Sade's eyes. The outdated wallpaper in the dining room, the scuffed hardwood floors, the kitchen cabinets I painted myself, but hadn't updated in a decade. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of every repair I'd deferred, every modern convenience I'd done without. My phone buzzed with a text from Murray. How did it go with Sadie? She said you seemed upset. Upset? As if I was an old woman having an emotional moment, instead of the property owner who'd just been pitched on destroying everything she'd built. I started to type a response, then deleted it, then started again and deleted that too. What was there to say? That his wife had just described turning my home into a tourist attraction? That they'd already had my property appraised without my knowledge? That they saw my 40 acres not as my legacy, but their lottery ticket? Instead, I set the phone aside and poured myself a glass of Dean's whiskey. The bottle was nearly empty now. I'd been saving it for special occasions that never seemed special enough, but tonight felt like the right time to finish it. The whiskey burned going down, a familiar fire that reminded me of winter evenings when Dean and I would sit by the fireplace, planning improvements to the farm and dreaming about the boys' futures. He had such hopes for them both, such faith that love and good values would be enough to guide them through life. He'd have been heartbroken to see what Murray had become, but he'd been proud of what Dustin was building for himself in Europe, making his own way without asking for handouts or expecting the world to owe him anything. As I sat in the growing darkness, I realized something had shifted inside me during that conversation with Sadie. The last vestiges of my maternal guilt, the voice that whispered, I should sacrifice anything for my children's happiness, had finally gone quiet. Murray thought I was too old to understand dreams. Sadie thought I was too sentimental to make smart business decisions. They were both wrong, but their mistake would be my advantage because I was about to show them exactly how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. The phone call came 3 days later when I was pulling the last of the season's tomatoes from my garden. Murray's voice was different this time, less demanding, more conciliatory. The change should have warned me. Mom, I think we got off on the wrong foot with this whole business thing. I straightened up, wiping dirt from my hands and my jeans. The October air carried the scent of burning leaves from somewhere down the valley. And for a moment, I was transported back to the autumns when the boys were small, when Murray would help me rake leaves into enormous piles just so he could jump in them. Did we? I kept my voice neutral. Sadie said your meeting didn't go as well as she had hoped. She thinks maybe she came on too strong with all the business details. A pause. You know how she gets when she's excited about something. No, Murray, I know how she gets when she wants something. But I didn't say that. She has some ideas, I said instead. Right, exactly. And I was thinking maybe we should all sit down together. You, me, Sadie, have a real conversation about this without any pressure or timeline. Just family, talking things through. Family? The word sat strangely coming from him now, weighted with implications I didn't trust. What kind of conversation? Just exploring options. Sadie's been working on some alternative proposals that might be more appealing to you. Ways to move forward that would let you keep the house. Maybe stay involved in whatever we build. I closed my eyes, feeling the sun warm on my face. Alternative proposals. Ways to move forward. The language of salespeople and lawyers designed to make surrender sound like cooperation. When did you have in mind? How about tomorrow? We could meet at the house. Your house, I mean. Make it comfortable for you. Sadie could bring some lunch and we can just talk. No presentations or anything formal. The house. My sanctuary, where I thought I was safe from their schemes. But maybe it was better to face this on my own territory, surrounded by the memories they wanted to bulldoze. All right, I said. What time? How about noon? I'll bring Sadie and maybe we can make a real day of it. It's been too long since we just spent time together. After I hung up, I stood in the garden for a long time watching the shadows lengthen across the fields. The tomatoes in my basket were the last of the season, plump and red and perfect, grown in soil I'd been amending for 25 years. Tomorrow, Murray and Sadie would sit at my kitchen table and try to convince me that all of this was somehow less valuable than their app about the Uber of sustainable agriculture. I wish you could see it. The legal work has been fascinating, too. I'm learning so much about international property law. He paused. Are you sure you're okay? You sound, I don't know, tired. Dustin had always been perceptive, even as a child. While Murray charged headfirst into every situation, Dustin watched and listened and saw things others missed. It was one of the reasons he'd excelled in law, and one of the reasons I'd always felt he understood me in ways Murray never had. I'm having some family issues with Murray and Sadie, I said carefully. What kind of issues? I found myself telling him everything. The phone call about being too old to understand dreams, the cafe meeting with Sadie, the upcoming family conversation that felt more like an intervention. Dustin listened without interrupting, and I could almost picture him in whatever small apartment he was renting in Prague, probably sitting at a desk covered with legal documents, his dark eyes growing more serious with each detail. "Mom," he said when I finished, "this sounds like they're setting you up for something." "That's what I'm afraid of." "Has Sadie mentioned bringing anyone else to this meeting? A lawyer, maybe? Or a financial advisor?" The question made my stomach clench. Not that she said. Why? Because this whole thing, the sudden change in tone, the insistence on meeting at your house, the talk about alternative proposals, it sounds like they're planning an ambush. They want you on your home turf because they think you'll be more comfortable, more likely to sign something. Sign something? The words hit me like cold water. "Dustin, I would never." "I know you wouldn't, but Mom, you need to be very careful tomorrow. Don't sign anything, no matter how reasonable it sounds. Don't even touch a pen if they put one in front of you." After we hung up, I paced the house like a caged animal. Every room held memories of Murray growing up here, his first steps in the living room, birthday parties in the kitchen, late night talks about his dreams and fears in the den where Dean used to read to both boys. But those memories felt contaminated now, overshadowed by the realization that my younger son saw this house not as his childhood home, but as an asset to be liquidated. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house settling sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear. By morning, I felt hollowed out, running on coffee and stubborn pride. Murray and Sadie arrived exactly at noon, and I could tell immediately that something was different. Sadie's smile was even brighter than usual, and she carried a large tote bag that looked suspiciously like it contained more than just sandwiches. "I brought lunch from that new organic place in town. I thought you'd appreciate the farm-to-table concept." Farm-to-table. Even their lunch was a sales pitch. We made small talk while Sadie arranged the food on my good plates, the ones Dean's mother had given us for our wedding midge. Murray complimented the house as if he were seeing it for the first time instead of having grown up here. Sadie admired my coffee mugs, asking where I'd gotten them, though she'd drunk from the same set at every family dinner for 2 years. It all felt like theater, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. "So," Murray said as we sat down to eat, "I wanted to start by apologizing for that comment I made about you being too old to understand dreams. That was out of line." "It was," I agreed. "I was frustrated and I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair. You've always supported my dreams, even when they didn't work out." He reached across the table and covered my hand. "I don't want money or business to come between us." The touch felt foreign now, manipulative. I resisted the urge to pull my hand away. "I appreciate that, Murray." Sadie leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Deborah, after our conversation the other day, I realized I approached this all wrong. I was so excited about the business opportunity that I forgot this is about so much more than money. It's about family and legacy and respecting what you've built here." Here it comes, I thought. "So, we've been working on some alternative approaches that might address your concerns," she continued. "What if instead of selling the entire property, we develop just a portion of it? We could build the processing facility on the back 20 acres, leave the house and the front fields exactly as they are." Murray nodded enthusiastically. "You'd still own the farmhouse and the land around it. We'd just be your business partners on the commercial side." "Business partners," I repeated. "Equal partners?" Sadie said, "Well, not exactly equal. You'd retain majority ownership, of course, but we'd handle all the operations, all the business decisions. You wouldn't have to worry about any of that." I wouldn't have to worry about business decisions regarding my own property. How generous of them. "There's just one small thing," Murray said, and I saw him glance at Sadie. "To move forward with the permits and zoning applications, we'd need you to sign some preliminary agreements. Nothing binding," he added quickly, "just paperwork to get the process started." Sadie was already reaching into her tote bag. Our lawyer drew up some documents, very basic stuff really, just formalizing our partnership and giving us permission to begin the application process. She pulled out a manila folder thick with papers, along with, as Dustin had been right, an expensive-looking pen. It's mostly legal boilerplate, but having everything in writing will make the whole process smoother. I stared at the folder without touching it. Inside were the papers that would sign away my independence, my autonomy, my right to make decisions about my own land. They'd dressed it up in the language of partnership and respect, but the intent was the same as Sadie's original proposal. They wanted control. I'd like to review these with my own lawyer first. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Of course, Sadie said, though her smile had gone rigid. But the thing is, we have a pretty tight timeline on the permits. If we don't file the initial applications by the end of this week, we'll miss the window for spring construction. Spring construction that I haven't agreed to. Murray's facade finally cracked. Mom, come on. We bent over backwards to accommodate your concerns. We're offering to let you keep the house, to stay involved in decisions. What more do you want? What I wanted was for my son to stop treating me like an obstacle to his success. What I wanted was for him to remember that this land wasn't just real estate. It was the place where I'd nursed him through chickenpox and helped him with math homework and taught him to drive on the old dirt road behind the barn. But that boy was gone, if he had ever existed at all. I want time to think, I said. Sadie's mask slipped entirely. Deborah, with all due respect, how much more time do you need? We've explained the opportunity, we've addressed your concerns, we've restructured the entire deal to meet your needs. At some point, you have to trust us. Trust. The word felt like a slap. I need to ask you both to leave, I said quietly. Murray stared at me. Mom, leave. Now. They gathered their papers and their fancy lunch containers, and I sat at my kitchen table watching my son choose a business venture over his mother's wishes. When the door closed behind them, the house felt both empty and full of the wrong kind of silence. Empty of the people I'd loved, full of the ghosts of who they used to be. I poured myself another glass of Dean's whiskey, even though it was barely past 1 in the afternoon. Outside, the October light was fading toward evening, and I realized I'd made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call the one person I knew I could trust. The one person who'd never ask me for anything except the chance to be my son. It was time to call Dustin home. The call to Dustin took 3 attempts to get through, and when his voice finally came across the crackling international line, it carried an urgency that matched my own. Mom, what's wrong? You never call this late. It was nearly midnight in Prague, but I'd been too wound up to calculate time zones. The whiskey had steadied my nerves, but it hadn't dulled the sharp edges of my anger. They tried to ambush me today, I said without preamble. Legal papers, high-pressure tactics. They wanted me to sign away development rights without even reading the documents. A long pause, then Jesus. Mom, are you okay? I'm furious, but I'm okay. I walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the moonlit fields. Dustin, I need you to come home. I'm already looking at flights. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it made my knees weak. You don't even know what I'm asking yet. You're asking for help. That's enough. I could hear the sound of typing in the background. There's a flight out of Prague tomorrow evening that gets into Chicago Thursday morning. I can be at the farm by Thursday afternoon. Dustin, your work can wait. Mom, you raised me. You never once made me feel like anything less than your real son, even when other people... He stopped, and I knew he was thinking of Murray, who'd spent their childhood reminding Dustin he was adopted whenever they fought. You never once asked me for anything. If you're asking now, it's serious. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, surrounded by the silence of the old house. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe properly. Dustin was coming home. Whatever Murray and Sadie had planned next, I wouldn't face it alone. The next day passed in a strange suspension of time. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, as if Dustin were bringing important guests instead of just himself. I baked his favorite apple pie, using fruit from the trees Dean had planted 20 years ago. I aired out his old room, the one he'd kept neat as a pin, even as a teenager. So different from Murray's perpetual disaster zone down the hall. Sadie called twice and sent 4 text messages, each one more insistent than the last. The messages evolved from friendly check-ins, just wanted to see how you're feeling about everything, to barely concealed threats. The permit deadline is Friday, Deborah. We really need to move forward. I ignored them all. Murray called once, his voice tight with frustration. Mom, Sadie says you're not returning her calls. What's going on? I told you both I needed time to think. How much time? We have real deadlines here. Your deadlines aren't my problem, Murray. The silence that followed was so long I thought he'd hung up. Fine, he said, finally. But don't come crying to us when you're sitting alone in that house, wondering what you could have built with your life instead of just existing. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Existing? As if the 25 years I'd spent creating a home, raising children, building a life from scratch was somehow less valuable than their app idea? Goodbye, Murray, I said, and hung up before he could respond. Thursday afternoon, I stood on the front porch watching for Dustin's rental car, my heart hammering with anticipation and nerves. When the silver sedan finally appeared at the end of the long driveway, I had to grip the porch railing to keep from running down to meet him like I had when he was a boy coming home from school. Dustin climbed out of the car, looking older than his 28 years old, wearing a charcoal gray suit that spoke of European tailoring and success. But when he saw me, his face broke into the same smile he'd worn at 7 years old, and suddenly, he was my little boy again, the one who'd ask me every night if I was sure he wanted to keep him forever. Mom! He wrapped me in a hug that smelled of airplane air and expensive cologne, but underneath it all, he still smelled like Dustin, like home. You look so grown up, I said, pulling back to study his face. The soft roundness of childhood was gone, replaced by sharp cheekbones and the kind of confidence that came from succeeding on his terms. And tired. That's a long flight. Worth every minute. He looked past me at the house and his expression grew soft. God, I miss this place. It looks exactly the same. Some things don't need to change. He caught the underlying meaning and nodded grimly. Tell me everything from the beginning. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd fed him countless meals, and I told him the whole story again. This time the details felt sharper, more painful. Hearing myself describe Murray's words, too old to understand dreams, and Sadie's manipulative lunch made me realize how thoroughly they tried to gaslight me into believing I was the problem. Dustin listened with the focused attention of the lawyer he'd become, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes on a legal pad he'd pulled from his briefcase. When he finished, he sat back and shook his head. Mom, what they're trying to do isn't just morally wrong. Some of it might actually be illegal. The pressure tactics, the rushed timeline, trying to get you to sign documents without even reading the documents. A long pause, then, Jesus. Mom, are you okay? I'm furious, but I'm okay. I walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the moonlit fields. Dustin, I need you to come home. I'm already looking at flights. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it made my knees weak. You don't even know what I'm asking yet. You're asking for help. That's enough. I could hear the sound of typing in the background. There's a flight out of Prague tomorrow evening that gets into Chicago Thursday morning. I can be at the farm by Thursday afternoon. Dustin, your work can wait. Mom, you raised me. You never once made me feel like anything less than your real son, even when other people... He stopped, and I knew he was thinking of Murray, who'd spent their childhood reminding Dustin he was adopted whenever they fought. You never once asked me for anything. If you're asking now, it's serious. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, surrounded by the silence of the old house. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe properly. Dustin was coming home. Whatever Murray and Sadie had planned next, I wouldn't face it alone. The next day passed in a strange suspension of time. I cleaned the house from top to bottom as if Dustin were bringing important guests instead of just himself. I baked his favorite apple pie using fruit from the trees Dean had planted 20 years ago. I aired out his old room, the one he'd kept neat as a pin even as a teenager. So different from Murray's perpetual disaster zone down the hall. Sadie called twice and sent 4 text messages, each one more insistent than the last. The messages evolved from friendly check-ins, Just wanted to see how you're feeling about everything, to barely concealed threats. The permit deadline is Friday, Deborah. We really need to move forward. I ignored them all. Yes, I just got back from Europe. I'm an attorney specializing in international property law. A pause. Actually, I think a meeting would be an excellent idea. My mother has been telling me about your startup, and I'd love to discuss the legal implications of your partnership proposal. I could hear Said's excited voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect, Dustin continued. 2 o'clock. Excellent. Oh, and Sadie, you might want to bring your lawyer and your bank manager. This is going to be a comprehensive discussion about the future of my mother's property, and I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what's at stake. After he hung up, I stared at him. Dustin, what are you planning? Justice, he said simply. Mom, they think you're a lonely old woman they can manipulate into giving up your life's work. They think because I'm adopted, I don't really count as family. They think because I've been in Europe, I don't understand the situation here. His eyes hardened. They're wrong on all counts. That evening, as we shared the apple pie I'd baked, Dustin told me about his work in Prague, about the complex international real estate deals he'd been negotiating, about the reputation he'd built for protecting clients from exactly the kind of predatory schemes Murray and Said were running. I've seen this before, he said. Family members who think they can pressure elderly relatives into bad deals because they assume no one will fight back. The difference is, those other clients were strangers. This is personal, Dustin. I don't want you to do anything that could hurt your career. Mom, he reached across the table and took my hand. Do you remember what you told me the night before my college graduation? I shook my head. You said that success without integrity was just failure with better marketing. You said that the measure of a person wasn't what they could take, but what they were willing to protect. His grip tightened. You protected me my whole life. You protected this farm, this family, this legacy. Now it's my turn to protect you. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Down the hall, Dustin was probably reviewing legal documents and preparing for tomorrow's confrontation. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I had an ally. Not just someone on my side, but someone who understood exactly what we were fighting for. In the morning, Dustin appeared at breakfast wearing another impeccable suit. This one, dark green-blue, with a silver tie that caught the light like armor. He'd transformed overnight from my beloved son into something more formidable, a weapon honed by years of legal training and international experience. How do you want to play this? He asked, spreading papers across the kitchen table. I want them to understand that their time of underestimating me is over, I said. I want them to realize that family loyalty isn't a weakness they can exploit. It's a strength they never saw coming. Dustin smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like Dean. The same quiet confidence, the same sense of justice that ran deeper than personal gain. Then let's show them what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness, he said. Let's show them what real family looks like. Outside, the October afternoon was crisp and bright, the kind of day that made everything look possible. In a few hours, Murray and Said would walk into my house, expecting to find a frightened old woman ready to surrender her independence. Instead, they were going to meet their match. At exactly 2 o'clock, I watched from the living room window as 2 cars pulled into my driveway. Murray and Said climbed out of their black BMW, followed by a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase and a woman with a tablet who could only be the bank manager. They'd brought their entire arsenal, just as Dustin had predicted. 4 against 1, I murmured. They really think they have me cornered. Dustin appeared beside me, adjusting his cufflinks with the calm precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. 4 against 2, he corrected, and they have no idea what they're walking into. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me like armor. This was it, the culmination of weeks of manipulation and months of growing resentment. the end of my role as the accommodating mother who could be taken for granted. I opened the door to find Murray wearing his most charming smile, the one that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. Behind him, Sade practically vibrated with excitement, while their companions hung back with the professional courtesy of people accustomed to closing deals. "Mom, you look wonderful," Murray said, stepping forward for a hug that I didn't return. "Thanks for agreeing to this meeting. I think today is going to change everything for our family." "I'm sure it will," I replied evenly. "Please come in." Sade introduced the man as Benjamin Cooper, their attorney, and the woman as Eva Baldwin from First National. Both shook my hand with the firm grip of people who were used to intimidating elderly clients into submission. "Mrs. Patterson," Cooper said, "I want you to know how excited we are about this venture. It's rare to see a family come together around such an innovative opportunity." Family. There was that word again, weaponized with surgical precision. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Can I get anyone coffee?" They declined, too eager to get to business. Sade spread her materials across my coffee table, the same table where I'd served countless Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations, now transformed into a corporate boardroom. "Deborah," Sade began, "I know yesterday didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped, but I think you'll be pleased with the revisions we've made. We've restructured everything to give you even more control." "Actually," I interrupted, my voice carrying across the room like a bell, "before we begin, I should mention that I've brought my own legal counsel." The temperature in the room plummeted. Murray's head snapped up. "Your what?" "My attorney. I hope you don't mind. I know how important it is to have proper legal representation for these kinds of discussions." Sade's smile became brittle. "Of course not. Where is he?" "She," I corrected, then called toward the kitchen. "Dustin, could you join us?" I watched their faces as Dustin walked into the room, and the moment of confusion was almost worth the weeks of torment they had put me through. Murray blinked rapidly as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Sade's mouth actually fell open. "Dustin," Murray managed, "what are you doing here?" "Representing my mother's interests," Dustin replied smoothly, settling into the chair beside me with the fluid grace of someone completely in control. He pulled out his own leather portfolio and placed it on the table with deliberate care. "Dustin Baldwin, Patterson Family Legal Counsel, specializing in international property law." Cooper leaned forward, studying Dustin with the wariness of a professional recognizing serious competition. "Patterson Family Legal Counsel. I wasn't aware Mrs. Patterson had retained an attorney." "She has now," Dustin said. "I flew in from Prague specifically to review the terms of your proposed partnership agreement." He opened his portfolio and withdrew a thick stack of papers. "I've taken the liberty of conducting some preliminary research into your business model and financial backing." Sade had gone pale. "Dustin, this is really between Deborah and Murray. It's a family matter." Dustin's smile was razor sharp. "You're absolutely right, Sade. It is a family matter, and I am family." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I saw Murray flinch, remembering all the times he'd told Dustin he wasn't real family because he was adopted. All the casual cruelties that had driven Dustin to excel, to prove himself worthy of a love that should have been unconditional. "Now then," Dustin continued, pulling out a pair of reading glasses that made him look even more formidable. "Let's discuss your business proposal. I'm particularly interested in your funding model and your projected timeline for profitability." Cooper cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should start with the property development agreement." "Oh, we'll get to that," Dustin said. "But first, I'd like to understand exactly what my mother would be investing in." "Miss Baldwin, you represent First National Bank. What's your institution's position on this venture?" Eva Baldwin shifted uncomfortably. "We're prepared to offer a construction loan based on the property as collateral. Collateral that my mother would provide while assuming all the risk." Dustin made a note on his legal pad. "And if the business fails, who's responsible for the loan?" "Well, the property owners would be my mother alone." Another note. Mr. Cooper, have you advised your clients about their personal liability in this venture? Cooper's professional composure was beginning to crack. The liability structure is clearly outlined in the partnership documents, which I've reviewed. Dustin pulled out another set of papers, along with some interesting background information on your client's previous business ventures. Sadie went rigid. What kind of background information? Public records, court filings, the kind of due diligence any responsible attorney would conduct. Dustin's voice remained perfectly pleasant. For instance, Murray, I was fascinated to learn about your organic dog treat company, specifically how it folded, owing $47,000 to suppliers who were never paid. Murray turned red. That was different. And your beard oil subscription service, the one that took advance payments from customers for products that were never delivered? Dustin turned a page. 14 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau, 3 potential lawsuits that were settled out of court. Dustin, stop, Murray said, his voice cracking. And then there's the food truck, repossessed after 3 months for non-payment of the loan. A loan that was co-signed by, Dustin looked directly at me, your mother. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the last vestiges of my maternal guilt crumble into dust. Here was the pattern laid bare, Murray taking from me, failing, and leaving me to clean up the mess over and over again. The point is, Dustin continued, my mother has already funded your entrepreneurial dreams to the tune of approximately $73,000 over the past 5 years. Money that was never repaid. Money that came from her retirement savings, her emergency fund, her mortgage payments, that she deferred to help you. Sadie was staring at Murray in horror. Clearly, she'd never known the full extent of his financial dependence on me. So when you come here today, Dustin said, his voice hardening, asking her to risk her home, her land, her entire life's work on another one of your business ventures, you'll forgive me if I'm somewhat skeptical. Cooper tried to rally. These past ventures are irrelevant to the current proposal, are they? Dustin pulled out yet another document. Because I've also done some research into Farm Fresh, your supposed startup. Interesting name, considering it was already trademarked by a company in Oregon 2 years ago. A company that's currently suing 17 different entities for trademark infringement. Sadie's face had gone from pale to green. We can work around that. Can you? Because according to the USPTO database, your trademark application was rejected last month, which means every piece of marketing material you've shown my mother, every business plan with that name, is legally worthless. The bank manager was already packing up her tablet. Mr. Cooper, I think we need to step outside and discuss. No, Dustin said firmly. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now. Because my mother deserves to hear exactly what kind of deal you were trying to pressure her into. He stood up, and suddenly the room felt smaller, as if his presence had expanded to fill every corner. You wanted her to sign over development rights to her property for a business that doesn't legally exist, backed by people with a proven track record of failure and fraud, funded by a loan that would make her personally liable for every penny if it failed. It's not fraud, Murray started. Isn't it? Dustin's voice cut like ice. Pressuring an elderly property owner to sign legal documents without proper legal review, using emotional manipulation in family relationships to create a coercive environment, misrepresenting the financial risks and legal obligations involved. Cooper was gathering his papers. I think we should postpone this discussion until we can. There won't be another discussion, I said, standing up beside Dustin. My voice was steady, stronger than it had been in months. I want all of you to leave my house now. Sadie turned to me with desperate eyes. Deborah, please, you don't understand what this means for our future. I understand perfectly, I said. You saw an old woman living alone on valuable land, and you thought you could manipulate her into giving up everything she'd worked for. You thought because I loved my son, I'd be too weak to say no. Murray was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Mom, I never meant... Yes, you did. The words came out quietly, but they carried the weight of years of accumulated hurt. You meant every word you said about me being too old to understand dreams. You meant to pressure me into signing those papers. You meant to take my home and turn it into your personal ATM. That's not... It is exactly what you meant. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. And now, I want you to leave. All of you. They filed out in silence, the bank manager first, eager to escape the wreckage of what she thought would be an easy deal. Cooper followed, already on his phone, probably calling his malpractice insurance. Sadie paused at the threshold, looking back at me with something that might have been respect. Murray was the last to leave. At the door, he turned back one final time. Mom? Goodbye, Murray. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the strength drain out of my legs. Dustin was beside me instantly, his arm around my shoulders. You did it, he said softly. You stood up to them. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. Outside, I heard car engines starting, the sound of tires on gravel as my younger son drove away, probably forever. The silence that followed should have felt empty, but instead it felt clean, pure. What happens now? I asked. Dustin smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached his eyes. Now we have some apple pie and talk about the future. Your future. The one that you get to choose for yourself. As we walked back to the kitchen, I caught a sight of our reflection in the hallway mirror. A woman who'd reclaimed her dignity, standing beside the son who'd helped her find her strength. Not the son who shared my blood, but the son who shared my values. Sometimes family isn't about the bonds you're born with. Sometimes it's about the bonds you choose to honor.